Welcome to Crash Course World War II History. I'm Hazel Erickson,
I'm Zach Laudy.
And I'm Matt Thorzik.
and this is the War for Europe and North Africa. 2 days after the Pearl Harbor attack, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill wired President Roosevelt saying, "Would it not be wise for us to have another conference? And the sooner the better." So began a great alliance between our two nations. Churchill arrived at the White House on December 22, 1941, and they spent the next 3 weeks discussing war tactics. They agreed to strike Hitler first and get the upper hand in Europe before pouring resources into the Pacific War. At the same time, Hitler ordered submarine raids along America's east coast. He planned to cut off Britain's supply from North America and starve the Brits into submission. At first, it looked like he would succeed, but ships began to travel in large protected groups called convoys. Ships were equipped with sonar to detect submarines, and planes were attached to ships to use their radar to shoot U-boats on the surface. With the improved tracking, Germany's seagoing vessels were devastated. By mid-1943, the tide had turned in the Allies' favor in the sea war. By the winter of 1943, Allies had been getting more and more victories on land and sea. Germany had been fighting in the Soviet Union since June of 1941, but winter had stopped them in their tracks. They started again in the summer of 1942, and the Germans wanted to capture oil fields and wipe out Stalingrad, a major industrial center. The Germans easily took the city and set it ablaze. The Soviets were ready to quit before Stalin ordered them to protect his namesake. By September, Germany controlled 9/10 of Stalingrad. When winter came along, Soviets took advantage and trapped the Germans in the city, cutting off their supplies. The German commander surrendered with the threat of starvation and hypothermia. The Soviets lost 1,100,000 men, more than all the Americans lost in the entire war. Despite this, it was a major win and marked a turning point in the war, and the Soviet army began to move westward towards Germany. Colored photo was a big deal in World War II, where people overseas and that were not in the war could actually see their men fighting in the war in color. This was a picture of Stalingrad, and you can see all the debris from the broken buildings. Stalin wanted America and Britain to open a second front and force Hitler to direct troops from the Soviet front. So instead, they launched Operation Torch. Troops landed in Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers in North Africa. They moved eastward, chasing General Erwin Rommel and his troops. After a month of fighting, the last of the troops surrendered, and Churchill was notified of the victory and the Allies' mastery of the North African shores. Dwight D. Eisenhower was an American general. Churchill and Roosevelt didn't think they had had enough troops to attempt an invasion on Axis-controlled European soil. He led Operation Torch, which was an invasion of Axis-controlled North Africa. He had 100,000 soldiers, mostly American. What's this, Matt? This is our mystery It says, "This colossal German surrender has done more for American morale here than anything that could possibly have happened. Winning in battle is like winning at poker or catching lucky fish. As a result, the hundreds of thousands of Americans in North Africa now are happy men." Is that written by Ernest War, the best of Ernest Powell World War II dispatches? Ha, I would win. The Italian campaign got off to a good start with the capture of Sicily. By this happening, the Italian government forced dictator Benito Mussolini out of power. On July 25, 1943, Benito was stripped of power by the king, Victor Emmanuel III. Hitler was determined to stop the Allies in Italy rather than fight on German soil. The Battle of Bloody Anzio lasted about 4 months, ending in May of 1944. Leaving 25,000 Allied soldiers and 30,000 Axis soldiers dead. Among the brave African troops, Mexican-American troops served in segregated units. 17 Mexican-American troops were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. An Mexican-American unit, Company E of the 141st Regiment, 36th Division, became one of the most decorated of the war. Japanese soldiers also served in Italy and North Africa. With the help of General De Los Emmons, the Army created the 100th Battalion, which consisted of 1,300 Hawaiian Nisei. June 6, 1944 was the first day of the invasion called D-Day. 156,000 troops landed in Normandy, France, 73,000 of which were American. Troops landed on Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, and airborne troops parachuted in. The Allies at this time had 3 million British, American, and Canadian troops, and mountains of weapons. Allied commanders tricked Hitler into thinking an attack was going to be placed on the French port Calais, over 150 miles away from Normandy, where the actual attack was going to be placed. On June 6, 1944, the Allies attacked just after midnight, starting the largest land-sea-air operation in American and Army history. Germany's retaliation was brutal, and men were seen sprawled all down the beach's sands and in the water. Despite the heavy casualties sustained, the Allies continued their advancement, and after 7 days of fighting, they held an 80-mile strip of France. After a month, they had landed 1 million troops, over 500,000 tons of supplies, and over 150,000 vehicles in France. On July 25th, General Omar Bradley led a massive air and land attack so General George Patton could get through Germany's line of defense and liberate the French capital from Germany. They succeeded by September 1944, and the Allies had freed France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Because of his success, the American people re-elected Franklin Roosevelt for a 4th term, along with Harry S. Truman.
Ooh, Miss Erickson, Miss Erickson.
Yes, me from the past.
I thought U.S. presidents only served 2 terms.
Yes, me from the past, that's true, but when we're in dire need, like in times of war, we can re-elect a president multiple times to avoid a weakened government and the stress of a re-election. In the Battle of the Bulge in October 1944, Americans captured their first German town, Aachen. Hitler responded with a desperate last-grasp offense and ordered his troops to break through the Allied lines and to recapture the Belgian part of Antwerp. This bold move, the Führer hoped, would disrupt the enemy's supply lines and demoralize the Allies. On December 16th, under the cover of dense fog, 8 German tank divisions broke through the weak American defenses along the 80-mile front. Hitler hoped that a victory would split American and British forces and break up Allied supply lines. The battle raged for a month, and when it was over, the Germans had been pushed back, and little seemed to have changed. But, in fact, events had taken a decisive turn. The Germans had lost 120,000 troops, 600 tanks and assault guns, and 1,600 planes in the Battle of the Bulge. Soldiers and weapons could not be replaced. From that point on, the Nazis could not do anything but retreat. By April 25th, 1945, the Soviet army had started storming Berlin. As Soviet shells burst overhead, the city panicked. Hundreds of soldiers stationed in Berlin were deserted and shot on the spot or hanged from the nearest tree, wrote Klaus Furman, a Berlin clerk. On their chests, they had placards reading, "We betrayed the Führer." VED stands for Victory in Europe Day, which was May 8, 1945. The war in Europe was finally over. President Roosevelt died a month before this happened on April 13, 1945, and Harry S. Truman became the 33rd president.